Nobody claps for the girl at the back of the pack. Nobody writes her name on the leaderboard. Nobody saves her a seat at the table or carves out space for her in the circle of people who are already sure they belong. She is the one who shows up anyway. Boots laced wrong, hair plastered flat with sweat, lungs burning before the first mile is done. And somewhere in the crowd of people watching her suffer, someone decides that her pain is funny. That's where this story starts. Not with a hero, not with a triumph, with a girl who couldn't keep up, surrounded by men who thought that meant she was nothing. And one man, standing at the edge of everything, who had seen enough wars to know exactly what courage looks like when it's still on its knees. His name was Commander Dale Watkins, 22 years of naval special warfare, 3 combat deployments. A man who had watched boys become warriors in the worst conditions the earth could manufacture. He had learned to read people the way some men read weather. Bone deep, instinctive, never wrong. And when he looked at Maya Chen struggling across that training ground with 2 men laughing at her back, he didn't see weakness. He saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. He saw the real thing. What happened next didn't make the news. It didn't go viral. No one filmed it on a phone or turned it into a clip that gets 3 million shares and disappears by Tuesday. It was quieter than that, and it cut deeper than that. And the people who were there that morning will tell you, 20 years from now, in different cities, living different lives, that they still think about it. Because some moments don't let go. This is one of them. The alarm went off at 4:15 in the morning, and Maya Chen did not hit snooze. She hadn't hit snooze in 11 months, not since the day she'd made her decision in the parking lot of a hospital in San Diego, sitting in her car with her hands on the steering wheel and nowhere to be and nothing left to lose, and decided that the person she had been up until that moment was finished, done, retired without a ceremony. She had driven home, pulled up the application on her laptop, and filled out every line with the kind of focus that comes when a person has already passed through fear and landed somewhere quieter and more dangerous on the other side. She applied to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Program's Joint Candidacy Track, a new initiative, controversial from the moment it was announced, that placed qualified civilian applicants into a modified version of the same conditioning curriculum used to prepare Navy SEAL candidates for selection. It wasn't Bud/S. It wasn't even close, but it used the same training grounds at the Naval Amphibious Base in Coronado. The same physical standards were applicable, and the same instructors, active and retired, who had shaped some of the most capable human beings on the planet. The program was designed to identify candidates for a joint federal task force. The requirements were brutal. The washout rate from the first 2 cohorts had been 68%. Maya had read all of that. She had read it twice, the way you read something you were already decided on, not looking for reasons to do it, but looking to understand exactly what you're walking into. She was 29, 5'4", 131 pounds. She had a master's degree in criminal justice from UC San Diego, 2 years as a county investigator, and a body that had never been asked to do anything harder than a half marathon she'd finished in 2 hours and 12 minutes on a good day. She had no military background. She had never been to a CrossFit gym. She owned 1 pair of running shoes that were 8 months old and probably needed replacing. She sent the application before she could think herself out of it. 3 weeks later, the acceptance email arrived. She read it standing in her kitchen at 7 in the morning with a cup of coffee she forgot to drink. She stood there for a long time after she finished reading. Then she put the cup in the sink and went to look up what a proper pair of training boots cost, because she was going to need them, and she had 6 weeks to get ready, and she was already behind. She was always already behind. That was the thing about Maya Chen, that the people who underestimated her never understood. She didn't come from a place of natural advantage. She came from a place of permanent deficit and had learned, early and hard, how to function there. Her mother had worked double shifts at a restaurant in Daly City for 15 years. Her father had left when Maya was 4 and sent birthday cards until she was 8 and then stopped. She had put herself through college on grants and a part-time job at a copy center that paid $9 an hour and stayed open until midnight. She had graduated with honors while carrying 32 hours of coursework per semester and a resting heart rate of 62 because she had learned to metabolize stress the way other people metabolize breakfast. She didn't tell anyone about the program, not her coworkers, not her friends, not her mother, who would have loved her and worried herself into sleeplessness, and Maya didn't want to carry that weight on top of her own. She trained alone for 6 weeks, mornings before work, evenings after. She found a pull-up bar at a park 2 blocks from her apartment and went there in the dark because the park was empty and she didn't want anyone to see how few she could do. 3. The first morning. Arms shaking like something coming apart at the bolts. She hung there after the 3rd one, feet swinging, and told herself that was the floor, that was the bottom. Every morning after that would be higher than this one. She was right, and it cost her everything it should cost a person to be right about something that hard. By the time she drove down to Coronado on a grey Sunday evening in October and checked into the candidate housing block, she could do 9 pull-ups, run 3 miles in 26 minutes, and carry a 40-pound pack for 2 hours without stopping. She knew it wasn't enough. She knew she was going to be the weakest person in that program by a margin that would be visible to everyone in the room. She had made her peace with that. She had not made her peace with Garrett Boyle and Jason Wills. They were in the same cohort. Boyle was former Army infantry, 6'2", the kind of physical specimen who looked like he'd been assembled by committee for the express purpose of making other candidates feel inadequate. Wills was smaller but louder, a former college wrestler from Ohio with a shaved head and a talent for identifying exactly what a person was most insecure about and returning to it with the consistency of a metronome. They had been friends for approximately 4 hours before they found each other's frequency, which was the frequency of men who experience other people's struggle as a personal entertainment. Maya clocked them on the first night. She had a talent for reading rooms. It was the thing that had made her good at investigations, and she read those two the way you read weather, the way you look at a sky and know, before anyone else has thought to look up, that it's going to rain before noon. She noted them and filed them and put them in the category of things she could not control and did not intend to spend energy on. The first training day began at 5 in the morning. They assembled on the beach in the dark, 18 candidates in a line, the Pacific rolling cold and black 15 yards to their left. The lead instructor was a retired Master Chief named Torres, who had the dimensions of a refrigerator and spoke in a voice calibrated to carry across a flight deck in a headwind. He walked the line once without speaking, looked at each candidate the way a mechanic looks at an engine he is about to take apart. He got to Maya, paused 1 beat longer than the others. She stared straight ahead. Her jaw was set. Her hands were loose at her sides. She had decided 3 days ago that whatever happened to her face in difficult moments, the jaw was going to stay set, and the hands were going to stay loose, because jaw and hands were the things people watched. Torres moved on without comment. The first evolution was a 4-mile beach run, in boots with a 20-pound vest. The sand was soft above the tide line, the kind of surface that eats effort and returns nothing. Within the first half-mile, the pack had sorted itself the way packs always sort, the fast ones moving ahead with the clean economy of people for whom this was not yet difficult, the middle settling into the grind, and at the back, 3 candidates who were already working visibly harder than everyone else for less speed. Maya was one of the 3. She knew her pace. She had trained herself to know it the way a sailor knows the feel of a boat in specific wind conditions, not by thinking about it, by feel. She was running at the edge of her sustainable threshold, which was exactly where she needed to be, and she was going to finish this run. She was going to finish it if it took her an hour and she crossed the line alone in the dark with everyone else already toweled off and drinking water. That was the plan. It was somewhere around the 2-mile mark that she first heard it. Not loud, almost conversational. Boyle's voice, carrying back from maybe 20 yards ahead where he had slowed. She did not understand yet why he had slowed, talking to Wills running alongside him. "I don't know why they let that happen," Boyle said. Will said something she didn't catch. "She's going to wash out by Wednesday," Boyle said. "Why make everybody watch the whole process?" She ran. Sand, boots, vest, breath. She did not react. She had decided she would not react, and she did not, and she kept running. But something in her chest made a small and quiet adjustment. A door she kept carefully locked, shifting just slightly on its hinges, and she breathed through it and kept her pace and ran. She finished the 4 miles, 15th out of 18, which was better than she had projected and worse than the 12 men ahead of her. She bent at the waist with her hands on her knees for 30 seconds, allowing herself exactly that, 30 seconds, and then she straightened and walked to the water station and drank. Boyle was already there. He watched her drink. "Good effort," he said. "Not mean, not kind. The particular nothing of a compliment that is not one." "Thank you," Maya said, and walked away. She ate breakfast alone and went over her nutrition plan and did not think about the voice on the beach, and got to sleep by 9:15 because she needed to be up at 4 and her body was a tool, and tools needed maintenance. The second day was worse than the first in the way that second days always are. The body has had just enough time to understand what was done to it, but not nearly enough time to recover, so everything starts at a deficit, and the deficit compounds. Log carries on the beach, an obstacle course with a wall section that was 8 feet high. A water circuit in 62-degree Pacific water that was not long enough to be dangerous and exactly long enough to be miserable. Maya got over the wall on the second attempt. The first attempt, she jumped and got her forearms over the top and hung there for 3 seconds, arms burning, feet scrabbling at the painted wood, and dropped. She stood in the sand, looked at the wall, jumped again. The second time she got over, from somewhere behind her, Wills laughed. It was the kind of laugh that was designed to be noticed. Not a genuine reaction to something funny, but a performance of a reaction, delivered at a volume calculated to land. She heard it. She heard it the way she heard traffic and wind and her own heartbeat, as information that existed in the world and did not require response. She walked to the next station. On day 3, during the log PT evolution, 12 candidates lifting and carrying a telephone pole-sized log that weighed somewhere between 200 and 230 pounds, depending on how much water it had absorbed from the previous day. Wills positioned himself on the log at a section where he calculated he was doing less than his share of the work, and she noticed this, and she shifted her grip to compensate, and the log moved wrong, and she staggered. "Watch it," one of the other candidates said. "Not cruel, just reactive." "She can't hold it," Wills said. To no one specifically, to everyone specifically. The log went down. Controlled, barely. Torres blew the whistle. They did it again. That night she lay on her bunk in the dark listening to the building settle and ran through the day the way an engineer runs through a system looking for failure points. Not punishing herself for them but mapping them, understanding the specific nature of each limitation, designing around it or toward it. The log. Her grip was failing at the 40-minute mark. She needed to add grip work. She made a note in the small notebook she kept under her pillow. She had stopped waiting for this to get easier. Easier was not the point. The point was function. The point was to keep being functional past the moment when functional stopped being comfortable, and past the moment after that, and the one after that, all the way down to the last moment available. She fell asleep. Day 4 started at 4:50 with a 5-mile run that became a 6-mile run because Torres added a loop at the 3-mile mark without announcement, the way life adds loops without announcement. And the correct response to both is to adjust and continue. Maya adjusted. She continued. She was 14th at the turnaround and 13th crossing the finish, which was 1 position better than day 1. The obstacle course came after. Walls, crawls, ropes, a balance beam over a water pit that dropped you chest deep into 58-degree water if you went off, which 3 candidates did and Maya did not, which she noted with the private satisfaction of a person who has learned not to celebrate until the finish line but allows herself one small internal beat of recognition when something goes right. Then came the partner carry evolution. Pairs were assigned by Torres. Maya was paired with a candidate named Reyes. Former Border Patrol, compact and strong, serious in the focused way of a person who came here to work and had no patience for anything that wasn't work. Reyes looked at Maya for exactly 1 second when Torres called their names, assessing, deciding, and then nodded once and moved to the start line. The evolution required each partner to carry the other for 400 meters on soft sand, trading off every 100 meters. Reyes went first, carrying Maya, and covered the 100 meters at a pace that was efficient and controlled. Maya went second. Reyes was 162 pounds. She would find out later. She found this out later because in the moment she did not think about the number. She crouched, got under him, stood, and ran. It was the closest thing she had experienced to the sensation of drowning on dry land. Her legs were sending signals her brain had to override every 4 steps. Her vision tunneled slightly at the 60-meter mark. At the 80-meter mark, she was making a sound that she would have been embarrassed by under any other circumstance, and was simply too busy surviving to be embarrassed by now. She crossed the 100-meter mark, put Reyes down, bent at the waist. Behind her, from the cluster of resting candidates waiting their turn. "Push her harder, she's worthless." Boyle's voice. Not quiet this time. Clear. Projected. For the people around him. For her. She straightened. Her face was red from exertion, not from what he said, or that is what she told herself, and she believed it for about 4 seconds before she admitted, in the private chamber where she kept her honest thoughts, that it wasn't entirely true. She turned around. Boyle was looking at her, not smiling, not flinching, daring her to do something about it. She looked at him for 3 full seconds, long enough to see exactly what he was, long enough to make sure he knew she saw it. Then she turned back to Reyes, who said nothing, and they finished the evolution. She did not report it that day. She had her reasons, and they were not small ones, and they had less to do with toughness and more to do with the particular calculation that women in difficult environments make. The calculation of how much a complaint will cost versus how much silence will cost, and which cost she was more prepared to pay. It was not a simple calculation. It was one she'd been running since she was 17 years old and had learned that being right about something and being believed about something were two different things with no guaranteed intersection. That night she wrote the date and the words in her notebook. Exact. Precise. A record the way investigators keep records not for feeling, but for fact. She put the notebook under her pillow. She set the alarm for 4:15. She did not hit snooze. What she did not know, what none of the candidates knew, because there was no reason to know it, no announcement made, no name posted on the board outside the operations room, was that someone had been watching the training evolutions for the past 4 days who was not a regular instructor. He had no role in the program that had been explained to the cohort. He stood at varying distances, wearing civilian clothes, and he watched with the particular quality of attention that belongs to people who have spent a great deal of their lives watching other people under pressure. He had learned something, in 22 years of that work, about what holds and what doesn't, about the difference between the person who performs strength and the person who simply has it, the way some buildings simply have their foundations and don't need to announce it. His name was Commander Dale Watkins. He was 51 years old. He had 3 silver stars, a Purple Heart from Ramadi that he didn't talk about, and a reputation in naval special warfare that was more like weather than like fame. Pervasive, atmospheric, something you didn't argue with. He had asked to observe the cohort as part of a curriculum review. That was the official reason, and it was not the complete reason. The complete reason was that he had been part of the team that designed the joint candidacy program, and there were aspects of the candidate selection that the written standards couldn't measure, and the only way to measure them was to stand on a beach at 5 in the morning and watch. He had been watching Maya Chen for 4 days. He had been watching Garrett Boyle and Jason Wills for 4 days. On the afternoon of day 4, standing 40 yards from the partner carry evolution with a cup of cold coffee and his hands in his pockets, he heard 4 words carry across the sand on a flat breeze. He did not react visibly. His expression did not change. He watched Maya turn, watched her calculate, watched her decide. Watched her turn back and finish the carry with the particular kind of focus that is not the absence of feeling, but the disciplined management of it. The kind of focus that is, in his considerable experience, a great deal harder to teach than any physical skill on the curriculum. He took a sip of cold coffee. He looked at Boyle. He looked for a long time. Then he walked back to the operations room, sat down at the table, and opened his notebook to a clean page. He wrote 2 names at the top, underlined them once, and began to write. Tomorrow was day 5. Tomorrow was going to be different. Day 5 began the way every day began, which was to say badly and in the dark. 4:50 assembly. Beach. 18 candidates in a line that had stopped being perfectly straight somewhere around day 2 when people started arranging themselves by the invisible gravitational pull of who they felt safe standing near. Torres at the front, clipboard, sky the color of old dishwater above the Pacific. What was different was the man standing 15 feet to Torres's right, not in uniform, dark jacket, hands loose at his sides. He was built the way certain structures are built, not for appearance but for the specific tolerance of specific loads, and you could see this even when he was standing perfectly still, which he was. He was looking at the line the way you look at something you already know the answer to and are simply confirming. Torres did not introduce him. The candidates exchanged glances the way people exchange currency. Quick, sideways. Don't let the instructor see you doing it. Nobody knew who the man was. Boyle, standing 4 positions down from Maya, glanced at him once, and then resumed his usual expression of determined confidence. Wills looked and looked away. Maya looked and held it a half-second longer, and then returned her eyes front. Because something in the quality of the man's attention made the back of her neck register something she couldn't name, and she had learned to pay attention to the back of her neck. The morning evolution was a timed 6-mile run on the beach road, not soft sand, road, harder surface, different pace tolerance. Torres announced the distance and the time cut off, 54 minutes. And something shifted in the line. 54 minutes for 6 miles on road was achievable for most of the cohort. It was at the edge for a smaller number. Maya did the math in her head in the 4 seconds between the announcement and the start whistle and landed on achievable possibly if the pacing was exactly right and the last mile didn't break down. The whistle blew. She ran. Her strategy was the same strategy it had been since day 1. Not to lead, not to prove anything to anyone watching. To run her race at her pace and to finish. She had identified early that her natural instinct when she felt behind was to speed up, and that this instinct was wrong. It cost more energy than it bought time, and the debt came due at the worst possible mile. She ran controlled, She watched her shadow in the grey morning light and kept her shoulders down and her breathing through her nose as long as she could. And she did not watch the men ahead of her because their pace was not her information. The man in the dark jacket ran with them. This was not announced. He simply fell in behind the pack at the start whistle and was there, present, unhurried, maintaining position near the back with the appearance of someone out for a thoughtful morning run who happened to be keeping pace with people working significantly harder than he was. He was not breathing hard. His expression was the expression of a man thinking about something else entirely. At the 2-mile mark, he was running alongside Maya. She noticed and said nothing because you did not talk during a timed evolution unless you were Taurus and you had a whistle. He ran with her for a 1/4 mile. She could feel the presence of him in her peripheral vision, a steady, calm shape that didn't labor. Then, without looking at her, he said, "You're dropping your left shoulder at the push phase. Cost you about 2% per mile." She almost turned her head. Didn't. "Chin level," he said. "Left arm drives back, not across. Try it for the next 1/2 mile." She tried it. It was not a dramatic fix. It was not the kind of thing you would notice if you were watching from the road. But somewhere inside the machinery of her running, a small misalignment corrected, and the return on effort shifted slightly, and by the 3-mile mark she had closed a gap on the next candidate ahead of her by about 30 yards, without perceiving that she had run harder. He was gone by then. She didn't look back to see where. She crossed the finish at 52 minutes and 41 seconds. 11th place, the best she had finished. She stood with her hands on her hips and her chest working, and counted to 10 before she let herself recognize what that number meant. Torres had it on the clipboard. He looked at her time, looked at her, made a mark, said nothing. The afternoon evolution was the one that changed things. It was called, in the program curriculum, the Adaptive Problem Sequence, a series of 5 timed problem-solving tasks, physical and cognitive, designed to be completed in pairs assigned by the instructors. The twist, built into the design deliberately, was that the problems were engineered to be harder for certain physical profiles and easier for others, and the pairs were assigned across those profiles intentionally, which meant the pair's combined performance reflected how well 2 very different people leveraged each other's strengths and managed each other's gaps. It was, in the language of the men who designed it, a character evolution. Taurus read the pairings, Maya and Boyle. She heard her name and then his name, and kept her expression exactly level. Across the group, Boyle's face did a small thing. A compression around the eyes that was not anger exactly, but was not nothing either. She walked to the station. He walked to the station. They stood 2 feet apart. She looked at the first problem board. Rope rigging challenge, modified load bearing, timed at 8 minutes. She could see at a glance that it required understanding knot mechanics and upper body positioning, both of which she had studied in her prep months, not because she was certain they'd appear, but because she prepared for things she didn't know she'd need the way other people bought insurance. "I'll run the knot sequence," she said, not asking. Boyle looked at her. The look had layers. The top layer was indifference. The layer under that was evaluation. The layer under that she didn't try to read because it wasn't her job. "Fine," he said. She ran the knot sequence. They finished with 40 seconds to spare. The second problem was a navigation task. Map, compass, landmarks, identify 3 positions in sequence under a 12-minute window. Boyle had land navigation background from the army. He was faster than her on this. She said so. He took the lead. She managed the time and called the positions out loud as he moved so they didn't lose seconds to communication lag. They finished with 2 minutes to spare. Third problem, fourth, they were working. Not warmly. Not with anything that resembled friendship, but working. 2 separate competencies being applied to the same set of problems without the friction of ego getting in the mechanism, at least for the moment. The 5th problem was a casualty drag. A weighted dummy, 210 pounds, across a 120-meter course with 3 obstacles. Both partners hauling, timed at 7 minutes. They picked up the dummy. At the 40-meter mark, Boyle shifted the weight suddenly, redistributing more of it onto her side, a movement that could have been accidental and was not. She felt the load change. Her left shoulder, the one the man in the jacket had told her she was already compensating with, took the addition and her footing shifted and she went down on one knee. "Stay on it," Boyle said. Not to help. To observe her struggle. She got up. She redistributed her grip, lost 3 seconds doing it, and kept moving. The dummy was heavy in the particular way of things that have no handles and no cooperation and no interest in being moved. She moved it anyway. She found a different grip and a lower center of mass, and she moved it for the next 80 meters while the clock ran and the course officers watched, and somewhere at the edge of her vision, the man in the dark jacket stood with his arms folded, and watched with the expression of someone who has seen this exact moment 100 times in 100 different forms. They crossed the finish at 6 minutes and 53 seconds. 7 seconds to spare. Boyle dropped his end of the dummy and straightened and nodded once. Nodded her. At the number on the clock. Maya put her end down. Her left shoulder was sending a message she would have to pay attention to tonight with ice and a resistance band. She acknowledged the message, filed it, and walked to the water station. Reyes was there. He handed her a bottle without being asked. "Nice run this morning," he said. She drank and didn't say anything, and he nodded because that was the right amount to say and they both knew it. What happened that evening was something she didn't see coming, and she had developed reasonable instincts for seeing things coming. She was in the small common room off the housing block, notebook open, going through the day's observations. The room was mostly empty. 2 other candidates eating at the far table. The sound of someone's phone in the hallway. She was working. She was always working. The door opened. Boyle came in alone. She looked up. He pulled a chair from the nearest table and sat down across from her in a way that occupied space efficiently and not comfortably, like a man who has been taught to take up exactly the space he needs and no more. He said, "That shoulder, carry on the dummy. I did that on purpose." She held the pen. Did not move. "I wanted to see what you'd do," he said. "You wanted me to fail," she said. He considered this with more honesty than she'd expected from him. "I wanted to know if you would." "There's a difference." She looked at him for a long time, long enough to understand that he believed this, that in his personal framework the distinction he was drawing was genuine, and that he had come here to say it, which was not nothing. "And," she said. "You didn't fail," he said. He got up, pushed the chair back in, went to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. "Wills is a problem," he said. "I'm not him." Then he left. She sat with that for a while. The notebook was open to a blank page that she had started to write on, and stopped. She read the half sentence she'd written before he'd come in, and then read it again, and then closed the notebook because she needed to think about something other than training mechanics for 4 minutes. She didn't know what to do with Garrett Boyle. She had built a clean architecture around who he was and what he represented, and it had served her, and now it had a crack in it that she didn't ask for and couldn't ignore. She was good enough at thinking honestly to understand that the architecture had been wrong in at least one dimension. That didn't mean it had been wrong about everything. People were complicated in ways that didn't cancel each other out. She put the notebook under a pillow and went to ice her shoulder. The next morning, day 6, was the morning Commander Dale Watkins walked into the pre-dawn assembly with Torres and stood at the front of the line and addressed the cohort for the first time. He introduced himself by name and rank. He did not list his service history. He did not explain why he was there. He said, "I've been observing this cohort for 5 days. I'm going to talk to you for 4 minutes, and I want you to listen to what I'm actually saying, not what you think I'm going to say." The beach was quiet, except for the ocean. He said, "There are 18 of you. 8 of you are working primarily to prove something to someone who isn't here. 5 of you are working to avoid failure. 3 of you are working because you came here with a specific purpose and you don't require validation from your environment in order to continue pursuing it. And 2 of you," he paused exactly long enough, "have spent more energy in the last 5 days trying to manage other people's performance than improving your own." Nobody moved. "I've watched a lot of candidates in this kind of environment," he said. "I've watched people who looked like they belonged here wash out by week 2. I've watched people that everyone, including themselves, had written off become exactly what this work requires. The common variable is not physical. I want you to understand that clearly. The common variable is this." He tapped his sternum once, not hard in the sentimental sense. "I mean, the willingness to continue functioning accurately when everything in your environment is telling you that you can't. That's the skill. That's the only skill this program is ultimately trying to develop. The rest is delivery mechanism." He let that sit for 5 seconds. "Now, I'm going to observe today's evolutions, and I'm going to ask each of you at some point today a single question. I want an honest answer, not a good answer. Those are not always the same thing." Dismissed to first evolution. Taurus blew the whistle. The first evolution was water work, pool, not ocean, timed underwater swims, drown-proofing circuit. The pool at the Naval Amphibious Base was 62 degrees in the early morning, cold in the particular way of institutional surfaces that have absorbed 20 years of cold water and given nothing warm back. Maya Chan had been a strong swimmer since she was 8 years old, when her mother had enrolled her in lessons at the Daly City Community Pool because it cost $11 a month and provided 2 hours of childcare while her mother worked the dinner prep shift. She had swum competitively in middle school and inconsistently in high school, and had maintained the mechanics ever since. It was the one area of the curriculum where the gap between her and the larger candidates narrowed to something close to level. She swam. She was first out of the water on the second timed event, not by a lot. By enough. She pulled herself up on the pool deck, and water ran off her in sheets, and she stood up straight before her lungs were ready for it. Because she had decided that she would always stand straight before she was ready to, and in the blurred peripheral vision of water and fluorescent light she saw the man, Commander Watkins, standing at the far end of the pool with his arms folded. He was watching her. She toweled off and went to the ready line. He came to her at the break between events, while the other candidates were getting water and catching breath. He stood next to her and looked at the pool and said single question. She waited. Why are you here? She had thought about how she would answer this if someone asked. She had a prepared answer, functional and honest as far as it went. The task force opportunity, the career development, the challenge of the program, all of it true. None of it complete. She stood there for 2 seconds and then discarded the prepared answer. Because I was in a hospital parking lot 11 months ago, she said, and I needed to decide who I was going to be after that. And this was the hardest thing I could find. Watkins looked at the pool. After what? He said. She was quiet for a moment. The pool lights moved on the water. My partner was killed on a call I put in, she said. I made the call. The information was wrong. He went in first. She said it the way you say something you have said only to yourself, in the dark, in parked cars, in the quiet of rooms where no one else is present. Watkins was quiet for a long time. Did you make the right call with the information you had? He said. Yes, she said. Then you know what you are, he said. You don't need this program to tell you. He walked back toward Torres. She stood at the pool deck with the water still drying on her skin and the morning light beginning to come through the high windows and the sound of the other candidates returning to the ready line. And she felt something shift in her chest, not the door that she kept locked, a different one. One she hadn't known was there, opening the smallest fraction of an inch. She went back to the line. Wills was 2 positions down. He caught her eye and looked away. He had heard something in the exchange, not the words, the quality, and something in his expression had changed. She catalogued it. What happened 4 hours later, in the afternoon, in the open space between the obstacle course and the vehicle bay, was the thing that the people present would talk about later in different cities. It was simple, and it was not simple. It lasted less than 4 minutes, and it ended things that had been building since day one, with the particular finality of a knot pulled tight, the kind that doesn't loosen. It started with Wills. The space between the obstacle course and the vehicle bay was a flat concrete apron about 60 feet wide, open on 3 sides to the marine layer, that rolled in off the water every afternoon around 1 o'clock and turned the air grey and wet and cold in the particular way that Coronado afternoons specialized in. There were wooden benches along the east wall for gear checks, a water station, a bulletin board with the daily schedule posted in waterproof sleeves, 18 candidates, post-evolution, gear strewn around them, the physical looseness of people who have been at the edge of their capacity for 6 hours and are now in the brief suspension before the next thing begins. Wills was at the water station when Maya walked in. He had that look. She knew the look by now. It was the one he wore when he'd been quiet too long, when whatever it was inside him that produced the comments and the laughs and the performances had been building pressure that needed somewhere to go. She'd seen it on the beach, in the common room, twice during log carries. It was a small and ugly kind of restlessness, like a dog that hasn't been exercised. She went to fill her bottle. He stepped slightly into her path, not blocking, just occupying space with the practiced casualness of someone who wants the encounter to look incidental. Strong swim, he said. She looked at him. Weird. He said, that's the only thing you're actually good at. The water ran cold, crawled over that dummy yesterday like it was a marathon, he said. Boyle had to carry half your weight and his. That's not what happened, she said. That's exactly what happened. Ask anyone. She capped the bottle. She turned to go. I don't understand why they keep running you, Will said, louder now, for the room. You're going to wash out. You've been washing out since day one. You're just slower about it than most people. I guess when you've got nothing else, he. That's enough. The voice came from the doorway. Not Torres. Commander Dale Watkins walked into the space at a pace that was not hurried and not gentle. He came to stand 8 feet from Wills with his hands at his sides and his posture the posture of a man who has spent 2 decades in environments where standing wrong could have consequences, and in all that time had never once stood wrong. Wills looked at him. Something in his face changed the way a room changes when someone turns on a light. You see all the things the dark was hiding, and not all of them are good. Sir, Wills said. Don't, Watkins said. He looked at Wills for a long 3 seconds, not with anger. That was the thing people would remember about it, that there was no anger in it, no heat. It was colder than that. It was the look of a man who has catalogued exactly what he is looking at and found it to be a specific kind of small. I've been watching this cohort since day one, Watkins said. His voice was at the volume of a conversation, not a command. The room was completely still. I've watched you, specifically, for 6 days. I've watched what you do when you think no one is assessing. When you think the evaluation is over and the next one hasn't started yet. I want you to understand something. Wills was standing very straight. The evaluation is never over, Watkins said. Not in this program, not in the work you're trying to qualify for. Not in this building, on this base, or in the specific 4 minutes before every evolution when you think the instructors are looking at their clipboards. He paused. They're not looking at their clipboards. Nobody in the room moved. In 22 years, Watkins said, I have worked with every kind of person this work attracts. I have worked with people who are the most physically capable specimens I had ever seen, and I have watched them fail at the first moment the job required something that wasn't on a training schedule. I have worked with people who arrived unable to meet half the standards, and I have watched them become exactly what this work needs, because what this work ultimately needs is not the person who makes it look easy. He stopped. It needs the person who keeps going when it doesn't. The marine layer outside had thickened. The grey light in the room was flat and even. What you've been doing to that candidate for 6 days is not evaluation, Watkins said. It is not competition. It is not even honest hazing, which has its own logic that I understand even when I don't endorse it. What you've been doing is the thing men do when they're frightened of being measured next to someone, and they have decided it's more efficient to eliminate the comparison than to improve their own performance. Something moved through Will's face. Fast, gone. I'm not going to stand here and give you a speech about inclusion, Watkins said. I don't do speeches. I'm going to tell you one concrete thing. In 6 days of observation, I have watched one candidate in this cohort perform under consistent negative pressure, with compromised support, while managing a physical deficit compared to most of the people in this room, and continued to improve every single day. One candidate. He looked at Maya once, briefly, the look of acknowledgement rather than performance, then back to Wills. And it isn't you. The room held its breath. You'll report to Torres after today's final evolution, Watkins said to Wills. He has a different conversation waiting for you than this one. Consider the next 4 hours carefully. He looked around the room. All of it. Every face. We're not building people who are impressive in unchallenging conditions, he said. Anyone can do that. We're building people who are functional when everything is against them. I would encourage every candidate in this room to ask themselves whether the last 6 days of their behavior is consistent with that purpose. He walked back to the doorway. He stopped. Chen, he said. She looked at him. Good swim this morning. He left. The room stayed quiet for about 4 seconds after he was gone, which is a very long time for a room full of people to stay quiet. Then the small sounds of movement came back. A water bottle, a chair scraping, breath releasing, and the ordinary texture of the space returned, but changed, the way rooms are changed by things said in them that can't be unsaid. Wills picked up his gear. He didn't look at Maya. He walked to the far bench and sat down and did not speak for the rest of the break. Maya stood at the water station with her bottle in her hand. Reyes appeared next to her, quiet-footed, as was his habit. He looked at his water bottle. She looked at hers. So, Reyes said. Yeah, she said. That was all they said about it. The afternoon final evolution was a team navigation exercise. Full cohort, split into 3 groups, a 5-kilometer course through terrain east of the base with compass and map and a problem to solve at each waypoint. It was the kind of evolution designed to make people work together, or fail to, and both outcomes told the instructors what they needed to know. Maya's group was her, Reyes, a former Coast Guard officer named Huang, and 2 Army vets named Breckenridge and Cole. Also Boyle. She noticed that Wills had been put in a different group. The group navigated. Boyle took a lead role on terrain reading, which was the correct use of his skill set, and Maya handled the waypoint problem solving, which were logic and observation tasks that required the same instinct she'd used for 2 years in investigation work. Reyes ran time. Huang managed the map-to-ground translation. Breckenridge and Cole covered the physical carry requirements. It was not a flawless evolution. They argued at waypoint 3 about the correct bearing and lost 90 seconds to it before Boyle and Maya reached the same conclusion from different directions simultaneously and moved on. But it was functional. More than functional. They finished second among the three groups, 11 seconds behind Group 1. Torres noted the time. On the walk back to the base, Boyle fell into step next to Maya. Not close. The natural proximity of two people moving in the same direction. He said that to Wills in front of everyone. Boyle said, "Yes," she said. "Watkins doesn't do things by accident," Boyle said. She thought about this. About the specific choice to say it in the room with every candidate present, in a voice calibrated to conversation rather than command. About the things said that could not be unsaid. "No," she said. "He doesn't." They walked the rest of the way without speaking. That night she sat in the common room with her notebook open and wrote for 30 minutes without stopping. Not training notes, not the incident record she kept in the back pages. Something else. It started as an accounting of the 6 days and became, without her fully intending it to, something closer to an accounting of the 11 months. The parking lot, the apartment, the pull-up bar in the dark, the boots, the application, the road from there to here. She wrote it the way she kept all her records, precise, undecorated, without the sentimentality that would have made it easier and the hardness that would have made it false. She wrote about Miguel. His name was Miguel Reyes Torres, and he had been her partner for 8 months, and he was 33 years old, and he coached youth basketball on Saturday mornings, and he had a daughter in 2nd grade, and he was the best investigative partner she had ever worked with, and she had given the order that put him through a door that she had believed, with the best information available, was safe. She wrote his name in the notebook. She had not written it anywhere before. She sat with it for a while. Then she closed the notebook and put it under her pillow and turned off the light. The morning of day 7 brought something none of them had been told to expect: a rest evolution. Torres announced it at assembly. 2 hours of unstructured time, no requirements, no assessment. The candidates looked at each other with the specific expression of people who have been running so hard they no longer trust the absence of running. Maya went to the beach. She sat above the tide line and watched the Pacific operate. The water out there was doing what it had been doing since before any human being had stood here and watched it, which was being enormous and indifferent and relentlessly ongoing. She found this, at that moment, in that specific context, to be the correct thing to look at. Watkins found her there. He sat down in the sand 1.5 feet to her left, which was close enough to be a conversation and far enough to be a choice. He didn't explain why he was there. She didn't ask. They sat for a while. "You wrote down what Will said," he said. "It wasn't a question." She looked at the water. "I keep records." "Smart," he said. "The right habit." He was quiet. "Why didn't you report it day 4? She had an answer she'd tested in her own mind and found to be honest. "Because I needed to know if I could handle it myself first," she said. "And because I needed to know if handling it myself would be enough. And because—" She stopped for a half second. "I've made that report before, in different rooms about different things, and I've learned what it costs." Watkins was quiet in the way that he was quiet, which was not the quiet of a person who has stopped listening, but the quiet of a person who is listening very carefully. "That cost is real," he said. "I'm not going to tell you it isn't." "No," she said. "I'm going to tell you," he said, "that the people who design programs like this one have an obligation to make that cost lower, and that obligation has not always been met, and that this is a failure of the program and not a failure of the people the cost is falling on." She looked at the water. "I heard what Will said to you yesterday," Watkins said. "Not the comment on day 4, the one in the vehicle bay." "You were already in the doorway," she said. "Yes." She looked at him for the first time since they'd sat down. "Did you come in because of what he said?" she said. "Or because of what you were going to say anyway?" He held her look. Something moved in his face, a considered honesty, the kind that costs a small thing and gives something back. "Both," he said. She nodded. That was the right answer. It was the most honest answer. She had learned to trust the people who gave her the honest answer over the people who gave her the right one. "What happens to Wills?" she said. "That's Torres's conversation." "I know. I'm asking what you think." Watkins looked at the water. "Wills is a man who has very successfully avoided being genuinely challenged," he said. "This program is designed to be that challenge. Whether it reaches him depends on whether he wants to be reached, and right now he doesn't know the answer to that question." He paused. "That's not your problem." "I know," she said. "Your problem," he said, "is finishing this program, which you are going to do. I want to be clear about that because I think you have built a very detailed architecture of uncertainty around whether that's true, and I want to put a crack in it." She almost smiled. "Almost. You've improved every single day," he said, "not just physically. The way you process a problem under load, the way you manage a team asset in an evolution, those are not common. Those are the things this work needs and the things the physical standards can't measure." He stopped. I'll say this once and not again. The people who run this program, including me, were watching from the beginning. You were never the dark horse here. You were always one of the people we were most interested in. The Pacific moved. A bird crossed the gray sky. She sat with that. Why didn't you tell me earlier? She said. Because you didn't need it earlier, he said. You needed to find out for yourself first. That's a different kind of knowing. He stood up. Sand fell from his jacket. He looked at the water for one more second. Day 8 tomorrow, he said. Longer log evolution. Your grip work is better. Keep it. He walked back up the beach. She stayed. The water did what it did. The sky stayed grey. She felt something that was not the door she kept locked, and not the other one she hadn't known was there, but something else. Something that felt less like opening and more like settling, like a structure that has been under stress finding its actual load tolerance and discovering it is greater than the stress applied. She sat until the 2 hours were over. Then she went back to the housing block, ate lunch, reviewed her notes for day 8, and planned her grip work for the evening session. She set the alarm for 4:15. She did not hit snooze. 11 days after the conversation on the beach, Jason Wills voluntarily withdrew from the program. He submitted the paperwork to Torres on a Tuesday morning and was gone by afternoon. He told 2 people he was leaving because of a knee issue that had been developing since week 1. This was partially true and therefore useful as an explanation, and he used it with the practiced efficiency of a man who has identified the least complicated version of the truth and decided to live in it. The remaining 16 candidates continued. Maya Chen completed the program 23 days later. She was not first across any of the final benchmarks. She was not last across any of them either. She finished with a composite score that ranked her 7th of 16, which was a number that would have seemed impossible to her on day 1, which was exactly the point. Torres shook her hand. Watkins was not there for the final assessment day. He had been called back to his regular duties somewhere she didn't know and didn't need to. She hadn't expected him to be there. That was not the shape of what that had been. What it had been was something she would carry forward the way you carry a specific kind of weight. Not heavy, not light, just present and load-bearing. The kind that after a while you stop noticing because it has become part of the structure of how you move. She called her mother that evening. Her mother listened without interrupting, which was not her natural mode, and Maya understood from the silence that her mother had known something was happening this whole time and had chosen, with the specific restraint of a woman who had spent 15 years watching her daughter figure things out on her own, to wait. I graduated, Maya said. Her mother was quiet for 3 seconds. Mija, she said. That was all. It was enough. It was more than enough. Maya sat on the edge of her bunk in the housing block with her phone warm against her cheek and the sound of the Pacific coming through the window, and somewhere in the building someone was playing music too low to identify, and she thought about a parking lot in San Diego 11 months ago, and a person she used to be who had made a decision in a car with her hands on the steering wheel and nowhere to be. She thought about what Watkins had said on the beach. You were never the dark horse here. She held that. Then she put the phone down, opened her notebook, and began planning the next thing. Push her harder, she's worthless, they taunted, until the SEAL commander stopped them cold.